Let me tell you something strange about silence in the modern world. We live in a time where nearly everything is put on display. Birthdays, breakups, celebrations, frustrations. Every moment seems to be uploaded, filtered, captioned, and shared. People document their morning routines, their gym sessions, their meals, their victories, and even their grief. It's as if life doesn't feel real unless someone else can see it. And yet, there are people who remain completely invisible. The ones who move quietly through digital spaces without leaving a trace. They don't post, they don't announce, they don't live stream their every thought. They're just there, watching, reading, noticing, understanding. And maybe you know someone like that. Maybe someone comes to mind right now, or maybe that someone is you. And it always leads to a question that most people don't say out loud but secretly wonder, why? Why stay silent in a world that rewards visibility? Why stay unseen when everyone else seems desperate to be noticed? It's easy to assume the answer. Oh, they're shy. Oh, they're not confident. Oh, they don't have anything to share. But that's not the full story, not even close. Because beneath that silence is an entire psychology, a whole inner world built on intention, perception, and choice. Not fear, not insecurity, but something deeper. Something most people overlook because they're too busy talking to ever consider the value of not talking. See, for some people, silence is not emptiness. Silence is strategy. Silence is control. Silence is the power to decide what the world is allowed to know and what it will never get access to. Because whether we want to admit it or not, social media has subtly shifted the way we understand ourselves. We've learned, almost without realizing it, that expression equals existence, that noise equals relevance, that visibility equals worth. And yet the quiet ones, the ones who don't perform their lives for others, often see the world with a clarity that those constantly posting never quite develop. They scroll, but they don't interrupt. They observe, but they don't compete. They reflect, but they don't react instantly to everything. They understand something profound, that the moment you show yourself to the world, you also give the world permission to evaluate you, to judge you, to form opinions about you based on fragments of information. And some people simply choose not to enter that arena. For them, silence is boundaries. Silence is protection. Silence is self-respect. It's a refusal to be reduced to a highlight reel. It's a rejection of the idea that a person must constantly broadcast themselves to prove they're alive. In a culture obsessed with visibility, choosing invisibility becomes its own quiet rebellion. It's not about hiding, it's about preserving something the world has forgotten how to appreciate, an inner life. And here's the part that might surprise you. The people who rarely post often feel the most deeply. They notice the energy behind people's words. They catch the subtle shifts in mood. They understand the rhythm of a room without needing to announce themselves in it. They aren't loud because they don't need to be. Their presence doesn't come from what they share. It comes from what they understand. And maybe that's why they stay in the shadows. Because once you step into the spotlight, you're no longer looking outward. You're looking inward, wondering how others see you, wondering how you appear, wondering whether your life is interesting enough, meaningful enough, successful enough. The quiet ones don't ask those questions. They don't measure their lives by likes or comments. Their relationship with themselves is private, unfiltered, and unperformed. Their silence holds a kind of power that noise can't imitate, a power that comes from choosing not to be consumed by constant comparison, a power that comes from living a life that doesn't need witnesses, a power that comes from not chasing validation from strangers. And ironically, the less they show, the more there actually is to them. Not because they're mysterious on purpose, but because their identity isn't stretched thin across 100 posts. It's intact, whole, undivided. You see, there's something rare about a person who doesn't feel the need to share everything. Someone who keeps their joy private, their pain sacred, and their thoughts unbroadcasted. In a world addicted to attention, silence becomes a form of self-mastery. It says, I don't need to be seen to exist. I don't need to be loud to matter. I don't need to explain myself to anyone. And that's what makes the quiet ones so fascinating. They live in the same digital world as everyone else, but they play by different rules. They don't post for approval. They don't announce for applause. They don't document for validation. Their silence is intentional, it's deliberate, it's meaningful. And the world notices, even if it doesn't always understand. Because here's the truth, the people who speak the least often think the most. The people who stay unseen often understand what everyone else is too busy performing to notice. And the ones who choose silence in a world that worships noise often have the loudest inner worlds of all. There's something interesting about people who don't broadcast their lives online. They have a way of approaching the world that's different, quieter, yes, but also more deliberate. They don't react impulsively. They don't form opinions at the speed of a scroll. They pause, they analyze, they observe the way a moment feels before deciding what it means. And that alone already sets them apart in a culture that encourages instant judgment. What's surprising is that psychologists have studied this kind of digital quietness, and they've found patterns, not of shyness or insecurity, but of strength. Many people who avoid constant posting tend to score higher in qualities like self-restraint, reflection, emotional steadiness, and independence from social comparison. In simple terms, they're not trying to prove who they are, they're trying to understand who they are. That's a very different kind of journey. And in today's online environment, it's becoming rare. Let's be honest for a second. Most of what we upload, the captions, the stories, the carefully framed photos, isn't purely about communication. It's about identity. It's about crafting a version of ourselves that feels acceptable, impressive, or admirable. We may not admit it, but every post quietly asks a question. Here's me. Do you like what you see? Every reaction becomes a measurement. Every like becomes reassurance. Every silence becomes a sting. And slowly, without noticing, our online persona becomes less like a window and more like a mask. But something fascinating happens the moment you stop posting. Your sense of self starts shifting away from external signals. You stop thinking in captions. You stop living like a camera is hovering over your shoulder. You begin to experience moments again, not as content, but as life. A walk isn't a potential story, it's just a walk. A meal isn't a performance, it's nourishment. A sunset doesn't need a filter, it simply exists, and you start existing with it. That's the quiet psychology behind many people who remain invisible online. They crave authenticity, not the curated version, not the polished version, it's the real thing. It's not that they hate social media, it's that they can't find themselves in it anymore. They aren't anti-technology, they aren't anti-social, they aren't rejecting the world. They're rejecting the idea that their life must be packaged into fragments for public consumption. Because once you reduce your experiences into highlights, you stop living in the depth of things. You start living for the appearance of things. You're no longer asking, what does this moment mean to me? But how will this moment look to others? And for some people, that trade, experience for validation, is too high a price. So they choose the opposite path. They live quietly but wholly. They feel deeply but privately. They think critically but silently. And this silence, it gives them room to breathe, room to understand themselves without interference, room to let thoughts unfold without needing an audience. There's a freedom in not having to announce every emotion. There's a peace in not needing your joy to be witnessed. There's an honesty in letting your life belong to you again. But here's something deeper. When someone stops posting, they often start noticing things they never noticed before. The tension in their shoulders, the way their breathing feels when they're calm, the thoughts they were always too distracted to hear. They begin to feel the difference between performing and being. And that's where the real shift happens. Social media isn't inherently harmful, it's a tool. But for some people, it becomes a mirror that distorts instead of reflects. It pulls them away from themselves, then asks them to curate a version of that distortion for approval. Stepping back from that cycle isn't about disappearing, it's about coming home to yourself. Let me tell you something strange about silence in the modern world. We live in a time where nearly everything is put on display. Birthdays, breakups, celebrations, frustrations. Every moment seems to be uploaded, filtered, captioned, and shared. People document their morning routines, their gym sessions, their meals, their victories, and even their grief. It's as if life doesn't feel real unless someone else can see it. And yet, there are people who remain completely invisible, the ones who move quietly through digital spaces without leaving a trace. They don't post, they don't announce, they don't live stream their every thought. They're just there, watching, reading, noticing, understanding. And maybe you know someone like that. And maybe someone comes to mind right now, or maybe that someone is you. And it always leads to a question that most people don't say out loud but secretly wonder, why? Why stay silent in a world that rewards visibility? Why stay unseen when everyone else seems desperate to be noticed? It's easy to assume the answer. Oh, they're shy. Oh, they're not confident. Oh, they don't have anything to share. But that's not the full story, not even close. Because beneath that silence is an entire psychology, a whole inner world built on intention, perception, and choice. Not fear, not insecurity, but something deeper. Something most people overlook because they're too busy talking to ever consider the value of not talking. See, for some people, silence is not emptiness. Silence is strategy. Silence is control. Silence is the power to decide what the world is allowed to know and what it will never get access to. Because whether we want to admit it or not, social media has subtly shifted the way we understand ourselves. We've learned, almost without realizing it, that expression equals existence, that noise equals relevance, that visibility equals worth. And yet the quiet ones, the ones who don't perform their lives for others, often see the world with a clarity that those constantly posting never quite develop. They scroll, but they don't interrupt. They observe, but they don't compete. They reflect, but they don't react instantly to everything. They understand something profound, that the moment you show yourself to the world, you also give the world permission to evaluate you, to judge you, to form opinions about you based on fragments of information. And some people simply choose not to enter that arena. For them, silence is boundaries. Silence is protection. Silence is self-respect. It's a refusal to be reduced to a highlight reel. It's a rejection of the idea that a person must constantly broadcast themselves to prove they're alive. In a culture obsessed with visibility, choosing invisibility becomes its own quiet rebellion. It's not about hiding, it's about preserving something the world has forgotten how to appreciate, an inner life. And here's the part that might surprise you. The people who rarely post often feel the most deeply. They notice the energy behind people's words. They catch the subtle shifts in mood. They understand the rhythm of a room without needing to announce themselves in it. They aren't loud because they don't need to be. Their presence doesn't come from what they share. It comes from what they understand. And maybe that's why they stay in the shadows. Because once you step into the spotlight, you're no longer looking outward. You're looking inward, wondering how others see you, wondering how you appear, wondering whether your life is interesting enough, meaningful enough, successful enough. The quiet ones don't ask those questions. They don't measure their lives by likes or comments. Their relationship with themselves is private, unfiltered, and unperformed. Their silence holds a kind of power that noise can't imitate, a power that comes from choosing not to be consumed by constant comparison, a power that comes from living a life that doesn't need witnesses, a power that comes from not chasing validation from strangers. And ironically, the less they show, the more there actually is to them. Not because they're mysterious on purpose, but because their identity isn't stretched thin across 100 posts. It's intact, whole, undivided. You see, there's something rare about a person who doesn't feel the need to share everything. Someone who keeps their joy private, their pain sacred, and their thoughts unbroadcasted. In a world addicted to attention, silence becomes a form of self-mastery. It says, I don't need to be seen to exist. I don't need to be loud to matter. I don't need to explain myself to anyone. And that's what makes the quiet ones so fascinating. But it's not rebellion for the sake of defiance. It's rebellion for the sake of healing, because stepping back from posting doesn't erase your presence. It reclaims your presence. It doesn't mean you care less. It means you care differently. It means your experiences belong to you again. Your emotions belong to you again. Your identity belongs to you again. There is something deeply restorative about living a life that doesn't have an audience. You start feeling moments instead of packaging them. You start observing yourself instead of analyzing how you'll be perceived. You start remembering what it's like to live without a constant mirror held up to your existence. And slowly, you begin to realize that the most meaningful parts of your life were never the ones that got the most likes. They were the ones you didn't post, the quiet ones, the private ones, the ones that didn't need to be validated to be real. The world today encourages us to share everything, but maybe the quiet ones are showing us something else, that a life can be full even when it's not visible, that a moment can be precious even when it's not shared, that a person can be strong even when they're silent. Because silence, true silence, is not emptiness, it's ownership, it's clarity, it's the freedom of knowing that your life is yours and not content for anyone else. And maybe, in a world overflowing with performances, that's the kind of freedom we all need more of. Something interesting happens when people step away from the need to document everything. They begin rediscovering the quiet joy of doing things purely for themselves. They cook a meal simply to enjoy it, not to capture the perfect angle of it. They travel without needing their location to validate the experience. They feel emotions without needing to explain them to strangers. And in that space, something inside them wakes up, a kind of presence, a self-awareness that doesn't need an audience or approval, a way of being that feels grounded, uncluttered, and deeply human. But we need to be honest here, not everyone who disappears from social media does it from a place of peace. For some, silence isn't a sanctuary, it's a shield. Underneath that quietness is fear. Fear of misunderstanding, fear of judgment, fear of being seen incorrectly. Social media has amplified a subtle but powerful form of anxiety psychologists refer to as self-presentational pressure. The sensation that you are being watched even when you're not. The constant awareness that your online self is always on stage, ready to be evaluated. And that kind of pressure is exhausting. It makes people second-guess their words, overthink their photos, question their own sincerity. And even when they do want to connect, they hesitate because the cost of visibility feels heavier than the reward. So they retreat, not because they are cold or detached, but because they feel safer unobserved. They want to be seen, but accurately, fully, authentically. And they know the internet rarely allows room for that kind of understanding. Ironically, the people who post the least are often the ones with the richest inner worlds. Their silence isn't emptiness, it's overflow. Ideas, reflections, emotions, all swirling inside them with more intensity than their quiet interface would ever reveal. They're not absent, they're saturated. They're paying attention in ways others aren't. They just choose stillness over spectacle. And whether they know it or not, there's a deep philosophical undertone to that choice. In a culture that constantly screams, "Look at me," choosing invisibility becomes a kind of self-definition. It's a way of saying, I know who I am even if you never see it. My worth doesn't depend on being visible. I exist beyond your perception of me. This kind of invisibility isn't disappearance. It's reclamation, reclaiming the parts of yourself that don't need public approval to feel real. The quiet ones scroll through the world like ghosts with beating heart. They watch others' stories, laugh at their jokes, ache with their confessions. They feel deeply for people they barely know. They participate in the world, but rarely project into it, because they understand something that most people never learn. Not everything you experience is meant to be witnessed. Some moments are too delicate to be shared. Some joys lose their meaning when exposed to an audience. Some sorrows can only be processed in silence. Some transformations require darkness, like a seed that cannot sprout in the light. Growth happens quietly. Healing happens quietly. Grief reshapes you quietly. Identity shifts quietly. Life's most profound changes rarely announce themselves online. And when you've lived through enough of these private evolutions, when you've felt life break you, rebuild you, soften you, harden you, and reshape you in ways that no one else ever saw, you start to realize something powerful. Being unseen is not the same as being insignificant. Visibility is not proof of existence. Silence is not a lack of depth. Invisibility is not a void. Sometimes it's fullness contained. We tend to think that if something is important, it must be shared. But the quiet ones understand the inverse. If something is truly important, sometimes it must be protected. They don't disappear because they don't care. They disappear because they care in ways that aren't compatible with performance. They are not hiding from the world. They are preserving the parts of themselves that the world would misunderstand, distort, or take for granted. And in that preservation, they find a kind of freedom that constant visibility can never offer. Freedom to feel without performing. Freedom to change without explaining. Freedom to exist without being consumed. Freedom to live without being reduced. Invisibility becomes a sanctuary, not to escape life, but to finally live it. Because the truth is, once you stop needing to be seen, you finally start seeing yourself clearly. There's a strange truth most people overlook. Identity isn't built in front of an audience. It's formed in the quiet when no one is watching. And this is where the paradox of the digital age becomes almost poetic. Social media was created to connect us, to shrink the distance between lives, to make the world feel closer, to keep us in each other's orbit. But somehow it often does the opposite. It gives us the illusion of closeness without the substance of it. It lets us follow people without actually knowing them. It lets us like someone's life without ever participating in it. And when you step out of that loop and when you stop posting, something shifts inside you. You stop chasing digital closeness and you start rebuilding real closeness. You begin noticing who reaches out without needing you to be visible, who checks in without an update, who remembers you without the algorithm reminding them. These connections feel heavier, warmer, more grounded, real in a way that no post could ever replicate. And the people who don't post, they live in that space. They build relationships that don't require proof or performance. They find comfort in the moments that never make it to a screen. They let life unfold without asking the world to watch. Part of their silence comes from something deeper, something psychologists call identity security. It's the ability to know who you are even when no one is applauding. It's not arrogance. It's not superiority. It's peace. Because when you're truly comfortable in your own company, you don't need an audience to confirm your existence. You don't need a crowd to tell you your life is interesting. You don't need constant updates to prove you're moving forward. You don't need strangers to validate your worth. And ironically, the people who don't post often have the richest stories, the kind of experiences that dissolve into laughter around a dinner table, not a comment section. They bring their stories to life in presence, not pixels, because connection to them isn't measured by likes. It's measured by shared silence, by the warmth of someone sitting across from you, by the kind of laughter that fills a room instead of a feed. These people, the quiet ones, carry entire worlds inside them. They observe everything. They process deeply. They understand quietly. They don't need the world to applaud their existence. They just need to live it. And maybe, just maybe, in a world obsessed with being seen, their silence is not a flaw. It's a mirror. It reflects back a truth we've forgotten. Not everything meaningful is meant to be shared. Not every emotion needs an audience. Not every moment must be witnessed to matter. Sometimes the most human thing you can do is to keep something entirely for yourself. And here's something fascinating about people who step away from social media for long enough. Their senses come back online. Colors feel richer. Time stretches a little longer. Conversations feel fuller, more textured. Meals taste better. Memories feel sharper. Even boredom becomes meaningful again. It's as if stepping away from the noise makes life itself reappear. Because when you stop performing, you finally start experiencing. There's a quiet beauty in walking through life without needing proof of every step. You're not calculating the angle of the sunset or the aesthetic of your plate or the cleverness of your caption. You're not planning how something will look to others. You're simply immersed in what it means to you. You're there, fully, deeply, unedited, inside the moment instead of outside it, watching yourself like a character in your own story. And this shift, this return to presence, is more than a preference or personality trait. It's rooted in the psychology of how our brains respond to validation. Every like, every comment, every reaction creates a small hit of dopamine, a temporary spark of pleasure. Over time, the brain learns to anticipate those sparks. It becomes conditioned to seek them, to crave them, to rely on them as tiny proofs of significance. But when you step away from posting, your brain begins to recalibrate. You stop hunting for micro-validations. You stop measuring experiences by how they will be received. You stop relying on external reactions to feel internally real. Gradually, your attention shifts from how does this look to how does this feel? And that shift changes everything, because the moment you stop performing your life, you start living it again. You begin to experience the world without the pressure of being perceived. You stop dividing your life into postable and not postable. You stop organizing your identity around what others might think. Instead of observing your life through a screen, you begin inhabiting it again. You start recovering a sense of authenticity that the digital world often dilutes. And in that recovery lies something profoundly freeing, a life that belongs fully to you, a self that isn't constantly curated, a presence that doesn't depend on visibility, a worth that doesn't shrink or grow with engagement. Because the truth is simple. When you stop performing, you start remembering who you are. Every time we share something online and it gets attention, the likes, the little red hearts, the comments, our brain releases dopamine, the same chemical that fuels habits, motivation, reward, and addiction. Over time, we learn to chase that hit, not consciously, but subtly, slowly. We begin organizing our experiences into shareable fragments rather than meaningful ones. Our minds stop asking, how did this moment feel? And start asking, how will this moment look? Now imagine someone who steps out of that loop, someone who breaks their brain's dependence on the tiny sugar rush of validation, someone who chooses not to participate in the reward cycle that billions are caught inside. That isn't apathy, that's discipline. It takes a particular kind of self-awareness to resist something engineered to keep you hooked. Social platforms are designed like psychological traps, elegant, addictive, and unbelievably effective. To say no to that pull isn't disinterest, it's strength. People who don't post often share a trait psychologists call a strong internal locus of control, meaning their sense of worth, meaning, and identity comes from inside, not from external applause. They don't need the digital echo of "you're enough" to believe they are. And here's something the research consistently shows. People who take extended breaks from posting or consuming social media often experience measurable increases in emotional stability and life satisfaction. Why? Because when your identity isn't constantly being reflected back at you, it becomes solid, it becomes genuine, it becomes yours. You stop editing your life into something palatable, packaged, or aesthetically pleasing. You stop shrinking your feelings into captions. You stop turning your pain into content. Instead, you begin living life in its real, tangled, unfiltered complexity, the way it was meant to be lived. And maybe that's the true rebellion today, to stay whole in a world that rewards fragments. But let's be honest, silence online doesn't always mean serenity. Sometimes it hides exhaustion, the quiet kind that builds slowly after months or years of trying to keep up with everyone else's highlight reel. Social media was supposed to give us connection. For many, it gave us comparison instead. And comparison, even when unintentional, is draining. You start measuring your worth in invisible ways. You start questioning your pace, your progress, your life. You begin feeling behind even when you're exactly where you're meant to be. So some people step away not out of bitterness but out of self-preservation. They realize they don't owe the world a performance. They don't owe an explanation for their silence. They don't need to prove their joy to make it real. They don't need to document their growth to validate it. One of the quiet truths of this generation is this: we've mistaken visibility for value. We've convinced ourselves that to matter, we must be noticed. But the things that matter most rarely happen in public. Some of your life's most meaningful moments, the ones that transform you, soften you, break you open, rebuild you, will happen in complete privacy. No audience, no evidence, just you and the moment. And maybe the people who don't post understand something the rest of us are still learning. Privacy is not loneliness, it's intimacy with yourself. Because when you stop broadcasting every thought, you start hearing your own again. You rediscover the quiet corners of your mind, the ones drowned out by noise. You reconnect with your inner compass, your forgotten desires, your hidden fears, your real voice. And that is profoundly spiritual in a world addicted to attention. It's not withdrawal, it's a homecoming. Of course, silence has its doubts. There are moments where you wonder if being unseen makes you invisible, if your quiet life means you're fading while everyone else appears to surge ahead. But over time, something beautiful happens. Your worth stops disappearing when no one is looking. You begin to feel it, steady, unshakable, like the hum of a quiet room after a storm. It's there whether or not the world pays attention. That might be what real confidence looks like in our era, not the loud declaration of self online, but the calm assurance of self offline. People joke, if you didn't post it, did it even happen? But the truth is simple. The things that shape you most deeply rarely make it to the feed. Your private victories, your quiet heartbreaks, your hidden transformations, your silent acts of kindness. These moments live in memory, not media. And maybe that's enough. Psychologists say authentic self-expression requires congruence, the alignment between your inner world and your outer one. But in the age of filters, that alignment gets distorted. We start living as characters instead of people. We become versions of ourselves molded for approval. So when someone chooses not to post, it may be their way of staying congruent, of protecting the fragile truth between who they are inside and who they show outside. They don't need everyone to witness their life for it to feel real. They don't need to photograph every sunset to remember the warmth of the light. They live fully, quietly, humanly. And here's the final paradox. Those who live quietly often experience life most intensely. They're not distracted by the performance of it. They aren't rehearsing their reactions. They absorb details others miss. The way light shifts across a room, the small hesitation before a confession, the softness in someone's laughter. They're present, and presence is the rarest currency in a world built on attention. Yes, sometimes their stillness makes them misunderstood, labeled distant, mysterious, detached. But look closer, their silence isn't emptiness, it's depth. It's the calm that grows when you no longer need to explain yourself to be understood. It's the confidence that comes from not needing to be known by everyone, just understood by a few. And maybe that's what people who don't post truly grasp. Not everything belongs to the crowd. Some parts of you deserve to remain untouched by algorithms and opinions, because the moment something becomes public, it stops being purely yours. So the next time you notice someone who never posts, don't assume they're hiding. Maybe they're just living. Maybe they've found peace in the quiet corners of existence, the ones not illuminated by the blue glow of a screen. Maybe they've remembered what the rest of us forgot, that being unseen isn't the same as being alone, that being quiet isn't the same as being empty, that sometimes the truest expression of who you are is silence. Because in the end, we are not meant to be performances. We are meant to be people. And the people who don't post, they remind us, with every unfiltered, unbroadcasted, beautifully invisible moment, what it truly means to live.